Thank you, Hannah. Kia ora koutou. Good morning, everyone. My name's Nick Kirk. I'm an environmental social researcher here at the Lincoln Manaaki Whenua site. And today I'm going to be presenting an I330 seminar. These are a series of 30-minute training seminars we are hosting here at Manaaki Whenua to help staff build their integrated research abilities. And what I'll be talking about today is a beginner's guide to coding and thematic analysis. So this presentation is aimed at staff who might be new to qualitative data analysis and want a sort of a quick and easy method to use when analyzing qualitative data. So today we'll cover what thematic analysis is. I'll also give you some definitions of some key terms like codes, coding, and theme development. And then I'll take you through a 6-step guide to coding using thematic analysis. The presentation should take around 20 minutes, so there should be ample time afterwards for questions. Just feel free to post the questions in the question box on GoToWebinar, and Hannah will raise them with me after the presentation. So first, thematic analysis. What is it? So thematic analysis is a popular method for analyzing non-numerical qualitative data. And the aim of thematic analysis is to identify themes across a qualitative data set. So non-numerical qualitative data can be collected from primary sources. For example, you might be part of a research project where interviews have been conducted with people or focus groups. As well, you can use thematic analysis to analyze secondary sources as well. So research papers, or maybe you have a database of newspaper articles on a single topic over 10 years. So these types of data can be analyzed using thematic analysis. Now, I will say right up at the start that there are various types of thematic analysis, but I don't really want to go too deep today into the different debates around the benefits and drawbacks of different thematic analysis methods. Rather, what I'll do is introduce you to a method of thematic analysis that I use quite frequently, which is a hybrid inductive deductive method. And I believe this will be really helpful for a wide range of different researchers here at Manaaki Whenua. So just to go over some key terms now. You might have heard of the terms code and coding and not being 100% sure exactly what that means, and so hopefully this will help explain these terms a wee bit more clearly to you. So a code is something which captures a single idea associated with a segment of data. Codes are the building blocks of themes. As you'll see from some of the practical examples I provide later, codes could be as big as an entire paragraph, but they could as well be a single word, a sentence, or a fragment of a sentence. Regardless, the important thing in the code is that it captures that single idea, and we'll get to that a wee bit later on. So coding is the process of actually identifying different codes in a data set. So the process of coding involves recognizing something in the data set and encoding it prior to a process of interpretation. Now, you can do this physically, or you could do it electronically. Now, if you have a really small data set, I would suggest giving it a go first physically by printing things off, using different colored highlighters perhaps, and going through and physically coding where you captured particular interesting ideas. However, if you're using with a really large data set, then I would suggest using qualitative data analysis software such as NVivo. That's what a lot of the researchers here at Manaaki Whenua use. But I will admit that that can be a quite complex program, especially for people who are first encountering it. So if there does happen to be quite a lot of interest in this, please let me know, and perhaps I could do another seminar specifically around NVivo and how to use it. Now, a theme is something which captures a common recurring pattern across a data set, organized typically around some central organizing concept. A theme tends to describe different facets of a pattern across a data set, and a theme also tends to be an amalgamation of different codes. I'll give you some practical examples from my own work later on, and hopefully this will make this more clear as well. Sometimes you can identify sub-themes where that same central organizing concept binds this sub-theme, but it focuses on one notable aspect of the theme itself. Again, I'll try and provide you with some practical examples from my work on freshwater policy implementation later, and hopefully this will illuminate exactly the differences between a theme and a sub-theme. Other key terms that I wish to talk about today is sort of this difference between inductive and deductive coding, and why I propose a hybrid between the two as being better than choosing one or the other. So inductive coding is when coding and theme development is directed solely by the content of the data. So imagine in the hypothetical scenario I gave before, where you have this data set of newspaper articles over the last 10 years. It might be on a topic, like say farming, but you know nothing else about the data set, and you aren't guided by any other concepts or theories or research questions in your first coding of that data. That would be a purely inductive process. This is a process in which the emphasis is on engagement with the data and acknowledging the subjectivity of the coders. In a purely inductive process, if I went and coded that data set and you coded that data set and someone else did, there's probably a good chance that we would find both different codes and develop different themes from those codes. But with a deductive process, coding and theme development are directed instead by existing concepts or ideas, either drawn from theory, personal experience, or perhaps different research questions that you have guiding the data collection and the data analysis. This approach is typically associated with more positivist approaches to thematic analysis, which mimic the scientific method. Here, the emphasis is on coding reliability. So in contrast to inductive coding, you would expect with deductive coding that, say, if I coded something and a colleague of mine coded and a third person coded it, that we would find most likely very similar codes and would develop very similar themes. And with this kind of deductive process, if you do have multiple coders, it can be really good to ratify your codes by swapping and sharing what everyone has found and seeing what the overlaps are and what the differences are, and then drawing from that some results. So what I propose instead is a hybrid inductive-deductive coding method which combines the strengths of the data-driven inductive process with the reliability of the theory-driven deductive process. And what follows now is a 6-step sort of guide to doing this type of hybrid inductive-deductive coding. So the first step is to develop something we call a code manual. Now, a code manual should be developed if there is an overarching research question. So you wouldn't develop a code manual in a purely inductive process, but you would if there was any in a deductive process. The code manual consists of draft codes based on either the research question or the theoretical concepts which underpin the research. So I'll provide you with an example here from some recent research I've done on freshwater policy implementation in New Zealand. So this project was guided by this research question here. I asked, what are the barriers to local government implementation of freshwater policy in New Zealand? And what I did was went out and interviewed a whole bunch of staff members from regional councils and unitary authorities in New Zealand, basically to ask them what their opinion is in regards to these barriers. So what I did was I created a draft code manual which contained a series of different sort of theory-driven codes, and each code in the code manual was defined as accurately as possible. So here on the right you have some examples. So this first code, which very closely resembles a barrier, which I'm anticipating might come out of the data set, one of them is identifying regional freshwater objectives. And you can see here in the definition I say that this group here, the Land and Water Forum, have previously identified an implementation lag and argued one way of resolving this would be to focus on the translation of public values into regional freshwater objectives. For these other codes, for example, the Ministry for the Environment has raised some issues that they believe alignment with national policy might be one of the reasons why local councils are struggling to implement freshwater policy, but also some of these, such as this final one here, ensuring staff implement policy as managers and senior staff envision, didn't come from New Zealand-based research, but was actually from international policy implementation research. So this is what a draft code manual looks like before the coding process begins. The second step is to begin that coding process and then to begin testing the reliability of the codes you have in the code manual. Now, this is probably done at the start by just coding a segment of the data rather than going through one whole time. So in my case, I had interviews, so I coded an early interview to see whether these theory-driven codes were being identified in the data set or not. And as I mentioned earlier, I think this is best done if you have multiple people read and code using the code manual as a guide. This then just provides you with an opportunity to see, where were the overlaps, where were the gaps in regards to, or the differences, sorry, in regards to what the different coders looked at, and compare these results. And if there are significant differences, consider rewriting those initial codes. So once you've come up with this new code manual, well, here's an example actually, of where I found a quote from the interview which backed up one of the codes here. So once you've done that, begin summarizing the data and identifying initial themes. So in my example of the freshwater policy research, each interview was summarized separately, and the key arguments made by each interviewee were noted. But what I will say at this stage was that the data set wasn't so large that I had to, I only had the ability to code what was summarized. In fact, I had enough time to code the data set completely, but in some cases, especially with enormous data sets, this might be impossible. During this first round of coding, you might find that several codes overlap with each other or reflect similar issues or concerns. This might indicate the identification of a theme, or alternatively, it could be that a number of codes can be synthesized into one master code, and I'll show you in this process later on. The next step is applying a template of codes and doing additional coding. So one thing you might have noticed is that the code manual only includes theory-driven codes at this stage. But because this is a deductive and inductive process, it's important to also add new codes you consider important to answering the research in question during the initial coding process. So you might be going through the data set for a first time and all sorts of things. You're identifying all sorts of interesting tidbits which might help answer your research question or explain some kind of phenomena you're investigating. And it's at this stage in which you begin adding these in as draft inductive codes. These new codes could form the basis of new themes, or they could build on existing codes that were identified in the code manual. At this stage, I wouldn't worry too much. Instead, I would just focus on that engagement with the data and trying to be as robust with the coding as possible. As I said, update that code manual, having gone through the data set once. Include any new inductive codes which might be identified. Oftentimes, I'll find that I will code things in very similar language. So it's really good to come back at this stage to see, again, to test those overlaps, to see if maybe there are two codes that are so similar to each other, you can synthesize them into one, and then update the code manual afterwards. So an example here, the barrier of acknowledging uncertainty was identified inductively, having coded each interview in my research. This was subsequently added to the updated code manual before the data set was coded a second time. So here we have the description of the code here. Uncertainty makes it difficult to implement policy because people making changes on their land want certainty will have positive effect. Planners need certainty for legal reasons and politicians want certainty, so they are praised for action. And this quote here sort of explains that in more detail. The next step in thematic analysis is connecting the codes and identifying the themes. So once you've gone through a second round of coding, the next step is to begin identifying themes in the data. At this stage, the task is to connect different codes and overlaps and similarities between them after that second round of coding. Identified themes will most likely speak to an important element in the research question. As I've explained before, in the research example I'm giving to you, the barriers to freshwater policy implementation as coded from the dataset merge to form broad themes which are described in terms of barriers. So what I'll present to you next, actually I'll go into the next step, which is corroborating and and legitimizing the coded themes. This final stage is to cluster themes together, previously identified from the coded text. Themes are clustered and subthemes are identified. Now, this is what I want to show you here, is how this process of going from codes to themes occurred. So what I'm showing you here is the initial theory-driven codes that are included in the code manual before even looking into the data set. The ones that are highlighted in red here are the ones that actually ended up becoming a theme. So as you can see, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different potential theory-driven codes at the start, but only one of them went on to form a theme. This is quite interesting as well, because my interview questions that I was asking the interviewees were very much informed by these themes, because I anticipated there would be barriers. I asked the interviewees that I'll talk about, is this a barrier? But yet they would talk about other things that ended up becoming more important, and you can see that from the inductive or the data-driven codes here. So there was much more than in the theory-driven codes. I think that this is fairly typical, but given the research question you're asking, how well developed your initial code manual is, it could end up being slightly different. So yeah, context really matters here. But as you can see, there were three here, highlighted in red, which ended up becoming themes. And underneath some of these were also a series of different sub-themes. So I'll show that next. So these are the ultimate themes that were identified out of the inductive, deductive, thematic analysis I did of the interviews. So that first theme there is alignment with national policy. The difficulty to align with national policy was considered a barrier by my interviewees. And you can see that here in a sub-theme, difficulty aligning plans with updated version of something called the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. So you can see the same central organizing concept, which is alignment, is key in the sub-theme, but it's focusing on a very specific element, which is the national policy statement. And that second sub-theme there is similar, but it's about the difficulty that local governments have aligning their local plans with the national policy statement for freshwater management, while also meeting a whole range of other national standards and objectives that is required of them. The second theme here was local government and community capacity, which came through inductively from the data itself. And there were three different sub-themes here, specifically related to resourcing, staffing, and quite interestingly enough, community expertise, which I wasn't anticipating. This third theme here is a mismatch between local issues and national priorities. And the fourth theme, which was also quite surprising and was unanticipated by me going into this, was the differences between regional councils and unitary authorities that really came out of the interviews that I had with unitary authorities. So you can see how from this final list of themes, we do have a mix of the deductive and inductive codes, but they come to form these themes, which I think were relatively coherent and interesting in regards to answering the research question. So that brings an end to the presentation today. I want to thank you all for listening. I welcome any questions that you might have in these last 10 minutes. As well, please feel free to email either myself or Melissa Robson-Williams, who's running the Integrated Research Program, for your feedback on this presentation. Let us know if the content was useful, if you'd be confident to use thematic analysis now, and if there's anything that you could tell us about, what worked okay and what we could change or maybe improve with this presentation, that would be much appreciated. So thank you very much.
Cool. We don't have a question as yet, but we do have one comment that says they would like another webinar on the in vivo, so that's one to add for the list.
Excellent.
That's
excellent.
Awesome.
Yeah. One thing I will say about in vivo is that it is it's an expensive product. We do have like a limited amount of licenses here at Manaaki Whenua, but for those researchers who might need to use it for a discrete project, get in touch with some of the people in the LPG team who might have those licenses, and you might be able to use theirs. But of course, I can help out with training for people who haven't used it prior to that.
Sweet. And Lara's just asked, is there a copy of the 6 steps somewhere that we can access after the webinar?
I could make and I could give access perhaps to the paper which describes these steps, which I took them from, which is from Faraday and Muir Cochrane. But other than that, I don't know if there's anything other than this presentation that's like a simple, like step-by-step way of doing it. So I'm happy to share that paper with you, Lara, and others who might be interested. But yeah, it's sort of a more complicated version of what I've just presented today.
Sweet. And we will have the video available as well, so they can watch back.
Yeah, actually, and I can share the PowerPoint presentation as well, so people can go through it at their own time.
Awesome. And we have the R packages that we could use as alternatives to NVivo.
There are, but I don't have experience using them. So so the whole time I've been doing qualitative data analysis, I've used NVivo. I've heard that there are alternatives. I've heard mixed things about them. So I believe there are cheaper versions, but that they probably don't have the same capacity as NVivo. To be honest, if there was a program and if people know one that's like a simple stripped down version of NVivo in which you could do coding quite easily, please let me know, because that would be really great. NVivo's such a large bit of software, I mean, so expensive because it has all of these different capabilities and functions, which once you get to learn them are really helpful. But for doing this kind of simple coding work, you only need a couple of those functions. So I don't know of any alternative software that can do that, but if other people here know, then I would be really interested in learning about it.
Perfect. And then I think that's the end of the questions that have come through so far. So if you're happy to wrap up there, and anyone else can get in touch with Nick via email.
Yep, that's just what I was going to say. Send any questions to me you might have over email. Send any questions about NVivo to me as well. Lara, I'll get in touch with you and send you the presentation and the paper I was talking about. But if anyone else wants to read those as well, please get in touch with me and I'll send them to you immediately.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone. Bye.